In January 1848, on the banks of the American River in California, a carpenter named James Marshall noticed a small yellow stone glinting in the sand. He picked it up, brushed it clean, and the sunlight danced across a fragment of metal that would change the history of an entire continent. That moment marked the beginning of the gold rush, one of the largest and fastest migrations of people in the 19th century. Within just a few months, a small, distant territory in the far west became the center of global obsession. People from the United States, Mexico, Chile, China, and Europe all rushed to the same land, where, according to rumor, gold could be found simply by digging the earth. California, only recently annexed by the United States, suddenly stood at the heart of humanity's race for wealth, a race no one could stop. Gold, long regarded as a symbol of power and immortality, now became a symbol of hope. For thousands, it meant a chance to start life anew, to leave behind debt, poverty, and despair. For others, it was proof that fortune could be earned by one's own hands. Over the next few years, hundreds of thousands of men and women set out on that same road, often unprepared and penniless. They crossed plains, deserts, and mountains. Many died from disease or hunger, yet still believed that beyond the next ridge, luck was waiting. The California gold rush became the beginning of a new era. It transformed the economy, accelerated the growth of the American West, and gave birth to cities that had never existed before. But along with new roads and banks came chaos, crime, and the destruction of nature. And as you listen to this story, take a quiet moment to support the project, leave a comment and subscribe so you don't miss the next calm documentary about how humanity's dream of easy wealth continues to shape the course of history. The river is quiet that morning, a thin current curling through the Sierra Nevada foothills, the water clear enough to reveal every pebble beneath. It is January 24th, 1848, and James Wilson Marshall, a carpenter from New Jersey, is inspecting a half-finished sawmill. He is 36 years old, methodical, not a man given to excitement. The mill belongs to John Sutter, a Swiss immigrant who dreams of building an agricultural empire called New Helvetia. Sutter imagines orchards, vineyards, and tidy European order blooming in the wild Californian valley. But that dream will vanish the moment Marshall looks down. He crouches near the tail race, the channel where water rushes out after turning the mill wheel. Something catches his eye, a flicker among the gravel. Picks it up. It is heavy, malleable, and refuses to corrode when hammered flat. Marshall suspects what it might be, but he does not want to believe it. He takes it to Sutter, who tests it with nitric acid. The metal does not dissolve. They both stare in silence. It is gold. Sutter panics. He swears his workers to secrecy. His empire depends on order, on laborers staying put, on soldiers guarding his land, on a delicate peace between native tribes, settlers, and the few remaining Mexican authorities. But California is a place where secrets never last. Within weeks, whispers of gold in the hills drift downriver. A Mormon merchant named Samuel Brannan hears the rumor, rides into town holding a bottle of golden dust above his head, and shouts through the streets of San Francisco, "Gold, gold," from the American River. That single shout becomes an echo heard across oceans. By March 1848, every tavern, dock, and saloon in Northern California is buzzing with the same story. Sailors desert their ships. Blacksmiths abandon their forges. Farmers leave their plows standing in the soil. San Francisco nearly empties. Overnight's population dropping from 800 to 200 in a matter of weeks. By the end of summer, the same city is crowded again, but this time with tents, mud, and chaos. News travels east with astonishing speed. By August, the New York Herald prints its first story about gold in California. Skeptics laugh. They've heard this before. Tallies of El Dorado, Sabala, and phantom riches that end in disappointment. But in December 1848, President James K. Polk confirms the discovery in his message to Congress. His exact words, "The accounts of the abundance of gold are of such extraordinary character as would scarcely command belief." Were they not corroborated by authentic reports serve as official permission to dream? That night, across the United States, men began to pack their belongings. In 1849, they will become known as the 49ers, a name that will outlive them all. They come from every background imaginable. Farmers from Ohio, merchants from New York, sailors from Boston, former soldiers, debtors, and adventurers who have never held a pickaxe before. Some bring wives and children. Most do not. They sell their houses, pawn their tools, and head west with a map, a prayer, and a promise. A journey from New York to San Francisco takes 6 months by sea. Ships must round Cape Horn, where waves rise higher than masts and gales tear sails like paper. The overland route is shorter but far more dangerous. Thousands of kilometers of plains, deserts, and mountains, with no guarantee of water or food. The trails that lead west, the California Trail, the Oregon Trail, the Mormon Trail, are littered with the remains of wagons, oxen, and hope. But nothing stops them. They cross the plains singing, "Oh, California." That's the land for me. The air fills with dust, the smell of campfires, and the constant creak of wagon wheels. Entire towns vanish as their populations head west. Newspapers estimate that in a single year, more than 80,000 people set out for California. Most of them never find gold, yet the movement itself changes everything. Settlements spring up along the routes, trading posts, inns, and forts that will later grow into cities. Merchants make fortunes selling supplies to the hopeful. Pickaxes, boots, shovels, and whiskey. The phrase, "selling shovels in a gold rush," will later become a proverb. The lesson that true profit lies not in chasing wealth, but in selling the tools of pursuit. By the time the first major shipments of gold reach San Francisco's harbor in 1849, the city is unrecognizable. Once a quiet port with a handful of wooden buildings, it now roars with energy. Gambling dens, boarding houses, and brothels stacked along muddy streets. Ships abandoned by their crews rot in the bay, their holes turned into warehouses and taverns. Everything is temporary, everything for sale. Historians still debate whether the gold rush was inevitable, whether any discovery, anywhere, would have sparked the same frenzy. But the truth may be simpler. The world was already waiting. The Industrial Revolution had made people impatient. The frontier promised reinvention, and gold, for one brief moment, seemed to promise both. What began as a sparkle in the river has now become a storm across continents. California's hills are alive with shouts, hammers, and dreams. Somewhere along those muddy banks, a miner kneels by the water, convinced that this handful of earth will change his life. In a way, he is right, though not in the way he expects. By the middle of the 19th century, the world is restless. The Industrial Revolution has turned cities into machines, belching smoke and opportunity in equal measure. Steam engines, telegraphs, and railroads shrink distance and multiply ambition. Yet even as technology accelerates, millions feel left behind. The idea of patient progress, of building wealth through generations, is wearing thin. People crave speed, certainty, and a little miracle to call their own. In America, that hunger finds its perfect stage. The country has just survived the Mexican-American War of 1846 to 1848. It has gained vast new territories, including California, but little understanding of what those lands contain. The East is crowded, industrial, and unequal. The West is open, mysterious, and supposedly waiting for anyone brave enough to take it. Manifest destiny, the belief that Americans are fated to expand across the continent, gives the journey a moral glow. Greed, ambition, and faith blend into one unstoppable movement. At the same time, global trade is transforming. Ships now connect New York to London, Canton, Valparaiso, and Sydney in predictable circuits. Newspapers cross oceans with them, carrying rumors faster than armies can march. When news of California gold first reaches ports in Chile and Peru, men drop their nets and grab picks. From Hong Kong and Guangzhou, laborers known as the Celestials prepare to cross the Pacific. The world is connected by sea lanes and stories, and gold becomes its common language. In the United States, the timing could not be more perfect. The nation is young but restless, its economy swinging between booms and depressions. A generation of men raised on thrift and duty now faces uncertainty. Rising prices, scarce land, shrinking hope. The promise that hard work always pays is beginning to sound hollow. Then, suddenly, the West whispers another offer. Hard work might not be necessary at all. The news of California arrives like prophecy. For the first time, ordinary people believe that wealth might no longer be inherited or monopolized. The rigid hierarchies of Europe seem far away. The old moral codes feel negotiable. The frontier offers escape not just from poverty, but from rules. There are no kings, no masters, no guilds, only luck. And luck, at least in theory, plays fair. The gold discovery also reaches a global audience weary of revolution and disappointment. In 1848, the same year Marshall finds gold, Europe erupts in a wave of failed uprisings. In Paris, Vienna, Berlin, and Budapest, citizens rise against monarchies demanding liberty and reform. By the year's end, most revolts are crushed. Exiles scatter across continents, their dreams broken but their courage intact. Many of them hear of California, a place that needs no permission, no politics, only a shovel. Historians often call the gold rush the first truly global event of modern capitalism. It fuses faith, technology, and communication into a single phenomenon. Steamships carry not just people, but newspapers filled with headlines about sudden riches. Letters written by miners travel back across the ocean, each one feeding the illusion that gold is everywhere, waiting. One man writes to his brother in Boston, "The rivers run with it. The hills are made of it, and no man here need work another day in his life." It is a lie, but a powerful one. The social makeup of those who respond is revealing. They are not the destitute, but the discontented. Many are middle-class artisans, clerks, and tradesmen who feel trapped by routine. They have enough education to dream, but not enough opportunity to realize it. The gold rush promises a shortcut, the ultimate loophole in life's rules. Even those who never intend to go feel the tremor. The idea itself, that fortune can be found, not built, seeps into popular culture, sermons, and politics. The world, in short, is ready to believe. Belief, however, does not mean readiness. Most travelers heading to California have little sense of the land or the labor ahead. They imagine gold lying in plain sight, like apples waiting to be picked. Some bring velvet bags to collect their treasure. Others carry maps drawn by men who have never seen a mountain. They do not know about the droughts, the diseases, or the distances, but they go anyway. What drives them is not logic, but longing, the same impulse that once sent explorers after mythical cities of gold. El Dorado had moved west again, from the jungles of South America to the hills of Sierra Nevada. And this diamond wears the face of democracy. In the public imagination, the gold rush becomes a moral test, proof that courage and initiative will be rewarded. Even preachers begin to frame success as divine favor. If gold is found, perhaps God put it there for the bold to take. Yet not everyone joins the chorus. In New England, some newspapers warn that greed will ruin the nation's soul. Writers like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau speak of the moral dangers of wealth without work. Thoreau notes in his journal that the gold digger is the symbol of the world's pursuit of the transit, but his voice is drowned out by the louder rhythm of marching boots and creaking wagons heading west. By 1849, the fever is everywhere. In newspapers, in conversations, in dreams, California becomes less a place and more a myth, a floating horizon where anyone can start over. And for the first time in history, the world believes that luck can be democratic. Historians still debate what the gold rush truly reveals. Human optimism or human greed? Perhaps both. But one thing is certain. By the time the first ships reach San Francisco Bay, the belief itself has already changed the world. The spark in the river has turned into a blaze that will not burn out for decades. Before the gold, California is quiet. The hills are soft and green after spring rain. The rivers slow and clear. The valleys filled with wildflowers and silence. It is a land on the edge of empires vast, underpopulated, and largely unknown to the rest of the world. In 1848, fewer than 15,000 non-indigenous settlers live here, scattered across missions, ranches, and a handful of small towns. To the east lies the endless desert. To the west, the Pacific, a geography that feels both isolated and untouched. The territory has changed hands more than once. For centuries, it belonged to Spain, governed from Mexico City. Spanish missionaries arrived in the late 1700s, led by Father Junipero Serra, and built a chain of 21 missions stretching from San Diego to Sonoma. Their goal was conversion and colonization, to teach Christianity, farming, and European order to the local peoples. The Miwok, the Tangva, the Chumash, and dozens more. These missions brought disease, displacement, and death, reducing indigenous populations by the tens of thousands. After 1821, when Mexico gained independence from Spain, the missions were secularized and their lands divided into ranchos, vast estates granted to California families of Spanish descent. Life on these ranches follows a steady rhythm: cattle, horses, fiestas, and trade. The rancheros are proud, independent people with deep ties to the land and to one another. Their wealth lies in hides and tallow. The California banknotes, as traders call them. Yankee ships from Boston anchor in coastal ports to barter cloth and tools for these goods. But California remains distant from Mexico City, both politically and physically. The government's reach is weak, and the borderlands rule themselves. Bandit raids, disputes over land, and local rivalries define daily life more than national identity. Then, in 1846, a small group of American settlers in Sonoma, encouraged by the U.S. Army, declares independence from Mexico and raises a crude flag with a bear on it. The so-called Bear Flag Revolt lasts barely a month before U.S. forces take control. By the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848, California officially passes to the United States. At the moment of Marshall's discovery, then, California is technically American but still Mexican in language, law, and spirit. Most residents are bilingual, and many do not even know the war has ended. American soldiers garrison a few posts, but the land's future remains uncertain. Few expect it to matter much. The region is too far, too empty, too remote to command attention in Washington. Its economy runs on barter and trust. Gold, when it first appears, has no official value. There are no banks to weigh or buy it. Towns like Monterey, Los Angeles, and Yerba Buena, soon to be renamed San Francisco, are little more than dusty outposts. The streets are dirt, the houses adobe, and the pace of life is slow. A man can ride for days without seeing another settlement. Time feels suspended, as if the modern world has not yet arrived. Among the indigenous peoples, the landscape holds stories older than the missions and the ranchos. Rivers are not boundaries but lifelines, carrying salmon in season and legends. Gold, when found, is considered curious but not sacred. A metal like any other. For generations, native families have known of the glittering dust in the rivers and used it for trade, long before foreigners cared. To them, it is decoration, not destiny. Then, almost overnight, everything changes. The first prospectors who arrive in 1848 disrupt centuries of balance. They cut down trees, divert rivers, and stake claims without permission. They build makeshift shelters, shoot game to exhaustion, and bring diseases the tribes cannot resist. Violence spreads. The newcomers call it progress. The locals call it invasion. Within a decade, California's indigenous population will fall by more than half, one of the fastest and least remembered collapses in modern history. Yet before the chaos begins, California still breathes in slow rhythm. The scent of pine drifts from the mountains. Mission bells ring faintly at dusk. Herds move across the plains, followed by vaqueros on horseback. At night, the only lights are stars and campfires. It is a landscape not yet carved by greed, still patient in its waiting. Few realize how quickly that patience will end. In the final months of 1847, just before the discovery, Sutter writes in his diary about his plans for expansion, vineyards, grain mills, and schools. He dreams of founding a city by the river, a peaceful colony built on labor and trade. When gold enters his life, it destroys everything he has built. His workers flee. His fences collapse. His livestock vanish. His land is overrun by strangers with pans and rifles. By 1850, Sutter is ruined, the first casualty of the very miracle that was supposed to make him rich. Historians still argue whether California's transformation was inevitable. Some say the land was destined to be discovered, exploited, and developed a natural step in America's westward expansion. Others see tragedy, a paradise undone by its own promise. Either way, the irony is impossible to miss. The very soil that had sustained generations now becomes its own undoing. Standing at the edge of 1848, California seems balanced between two worlds, the old and the new, the peaceful and the frantic, the timeless and the temporary. Wheat in weeks, word of gold will tear open that balance forever. The quiet land, once too far to matter, is about to become the center of everything. The morning is cold along the American River. Mist hangs over the pines, and the sound of rushing water drowns out every human thought. James Wilson Marshall walks the edge of the millress, the channel meant to carry water from Sutter's sawmill, inspecting the timberwork for leaks. He has been at this task for weeks, measuring, hammering, testing. The project is tedious but essential. Then, as he steps into the shallows, something bright catches his eye. It is small, no larger than a fingernail, but it shines with a dull, heavy light. He picks it up and turns it in his hand. It bends easily between his fingers. "That looks like gold," he mutters, almost to himself. At first, he tries to ignore it. Marcel knows the value of stability. He is an employee, not a dreamer. He wants to finish the mill, get paid, and move on. But curiosity wins. He collects a few more flakes and takes them to John Sutter, his employer. Together, they test the metal by every method they know, flattening it with a hammer, weighing it, even boiling it and lye in nitric acid. The flakes do not corrode. There is no doubt left. They have found gold. Sutter is horrified. He has no desire for chaos. His empire, New Helvetia, depends on order, on the quiet labor of his workers, most of them indigenous or former soldiers. Gold will bring madness, he knows. "Don't tell anyone," he says to Marcia. But the human mouth is a poor vault. Within days, whispers slip through the valley. Workers at the mill begin to vanish, trading shovels for dreams. One of them, a Mormon named Henry Beegler, records the discovery in his diary, an entry that survives today as one of the first written proofs of the event. Others carry samples of the gold to nearby towns. They show the flakes to merchants and blacksmiths, to anyone who will look. Some laugh, others test it for themselves. The results are always the same. By the spring of 1848, the secret has already reached San Francisco. Among those who hear it is Samuel Brannan, a storekeeper, newspaperman, and perhaps the first true capitalist of the gold rush. Brannan sees what Sutter cannot. Not ruin, but opportunity. He rushes to Soto's fort, fills a bottle with gold dust, and gallops back to San Francisco. On May 12th, he bursts into the streets shouting, "Gold, gold from the American River," waving the bottle above his head. By nightfall, half the city is gone. Ships lie empty in the harbor, their crews vanished. Clerks abandon their offices, carpenters their tools, soldiers their posts. San Francisco's newspaper, the Californian, halts publication because its entire staff has run to the diggings. Brannan, meanwhile, becomes the first millionaire of the gold rush, not by mining, but by selling. He owns the only store between the city and the mines. When he advertises picks, pans, and shovels, men line up 4 blocks. The price of a shovel rises from 50 cents to $15. Within weeks, Brannan makes hundreds of thousands and keeps his hands perfectly clean of dirt. Historians still debate who deserves credit for the discovery. Some say Marshall for finding the first flake. Others point to Sutter, whose land contained it. But history tends to remember the loudest voice, not the first one. Brannan's cry of gold becomes the sound that launches a global migration. Bilates Sumer, the hills of the Sierra Nevada, swarm with prospectors. They call themselves Argonauts. Borrowing from the Greek myth of Jason and his golden fleece, it is an apt metaphor, a mix of adventure and delusion. The early camps are simple. Tents of canvas, fires of pine wood, a pan, a knife, and luck. Men sleep on the ground, their boots hanging above to keep out scorpions. Days begin before sunrise and end. Long after dark, backs bent over cold water, hands raw from gravel. A few are lucky. In July 1848, a man named Benjamin Woods finds gold worth $2,000 in a single day. A fortune then, enough to buy land and livestock. His story, repeated in every tavern and port, ignites new waves of migrants. For every man like Woods, however, there are hundreds who find nothing but mud and disappointment. The government is slow to react. California is not yet a state. There are no laws, no tax offices, no officials to regulate claims. Disputes are settled with fists, knives, or guns. A man's right to a riverbank is only as strong as his aim. Meanwhile, Sutter's fears come true. His fields are trampled, his cattle stolen, his workers gone. Squatters flood his property, cutting timber for sluices and shelters. Lawsuits pile up, but there is no authority to enforce them. Sutter's Fort, once the center of civilization in the valley, turns into a ghost of what it was. By 1850, his estate is bankrupt. He spends the rest of his life writing petitions to Congress, asking for compensation that never comes. As for Marshall, his fate is equally ironic. Though he made one of the most famous discoveries in history, he never profits from it. He becomes a wanderer, working odd jobs, giving occasional interviews to curious journalists. When he dies in 1885, he is nearly forgotten, buried under a simple stone near Coloma, the town that grew beside his river. And yet, his single act of curiosity reshaped the world. When gold was discovered, the United States had only 29 states. Within 2 years, California would become the 30th. A transformation so rapid that Congress struggled to keep pace. The population exploded, trade routes multiplied, and money flowed westward. The idea of instant wealth, once a fantasy, became a foundation of national identity. But the gold that glittered in Marshall's hand was only the beginning. The true fever was still to come, carried not by rivers, but by rumor. The first news of California's gold moves faster than any caravan or ship. It spreads by mouth, letter, and imagination, each retelling brighter than the last. What begins as a handful of whispers in the Sacramento Valley becomes a worldwide hallucination. By the time truth catches up, it is already too late. The fever has begun. In early 1848, the discovery is still treated as local gossip. Small reports appear in coastal newspapers, printed beside stories about weather and shipping schedules. Few readers believe them. Gold found in California, writes one editor in Monterey. But such reports have circulated before. Most assume it will fade, as so many rumors of El Dorado had before. But this one refuses to die. By August 1848, the New York Herald runs a story based on letters from sailors recently returned from San Francisco. They claim that men are scooping gold from riverbeds as one might pluck fruit from a branch. The description is absurd, yet irresistible. In taverns and trading houses across the East Coast, people begin to wonder, what if it's true? Then, in December 1848, comes the moment that turns speculation into certainty. During his annual address to Congress, President James K. Polk confirms the reports, the accounts of the abundance of gold, he declares, are of such extraordinary character as would scarcely command belief were they not corroborated by authentic reports. The words carry the weight of government. Gold is no longer a rumor. It is reality endorsed by the highest office in the land. The effect is immediate. The next morning, newspapers across the United States reprint the speech. Some add sketches of gold nuggets the size of potatoes. Within a week, the nation's ports are filled with men arguing over maps and passage prices. Posters appear. California, land of fortune. Gold for the taking. Merchants offer mining kits containing pans, boots, and powder. Churches preach sermons about divine providence. Even school children talk of running away to strike it rich. In New York, an estimated 25,000 people prepare to leave within months. Ships are chartered, crews recruited, supplies hoarded. A young lawyer named William H. Macy writes to his family, "There is no longer any reason to labor for another man as 4chan when the hills of California are open to all." He sells his law books for a pickaxe. The routes west divide the fortune seekers into three main groups. The first and most daring travel overland, following the California Trail across plains, mountains, and deserts, a journey of more than 3,000 kilometers that can take 6 months. The second traveled by sea, sailing south around Cape Horn, a voyage of nearly 25,000 kilometers, plagued by storms and scurvy. The third choose the shortcut, sailing to Panama, crossing the jungle by mule or canoe, and catching another ship north to San Francisco. The shortcut kills almost as many as the long way. Each route becomes a story of endurance and illusion. Wagon trains vanish into snowstorms. Ships disappear at sea. Panama's jungles claim thousands with malaria and dysentery. But for every letter home describing misery, a dozen more describe miracles. Gold by the handful. Fortune in a week. A paradise for the brave. Every exaggeration fuels another departure. By the spring of 1849, the trickle becomes a flood. Nearly 80,000 people are already on the move. The first wave of what newspapers will soon call the Argonauts. The name comes from Greek legend, but the spirit is thoroughly American. Restless, confident, and utterly convinced that luck can be earned by motion. The fever crosses borders with ease. From Chile and Peru, miners sail north, bringing with them experience and tools that will later dominate the diggings. In China, posters along the Pearl River promise Gold Mountain. Gamson, across the Pacific. By the summer of 1850, more than 20,000 Chinese migrants have arrived in California, joining a mix of Chileans, Mexicans, Australians, and Europeans in the crowded camps. San Francisco becomes a miniature world, a babel of languages, ambitions, and misunderstandings. In London, newspapers print letters from returning sailors describing streets paved with nuggets. In Paris, satirical plays mock the Americans as diggers of illusion. In Sydney, entire crews desert ships to sail east. Even the remote Russian outpost of Sitka sends word to its traders. There is gold to the south. Not everyone believes the miracle. A few cautious voices warn of disaster. The British magazine The Economist calls the reports a collective madness of modern times. But mockery cannot stop the movement. The first shipments of real Californian gold, weighing hundreds of kilograms, reached New York in late 1849. When displayed in shop windows, the yellow metal silences all doubt. Crowds press their faces to the glass, seeing in its reflection not California, but themselves, richer, freer, transformed. The social fabric of the United States stretches thin. Shops close as clerks quit. Farms are abandoned women are left to manage households alone. Newspapers call it the largest voluntary migration since the Crusades. Preachers quote scripture to justify the exodus. Others condemn it as greed disguised as adventure. The devil, writes one Boston passer, has found a new pulpit, and its name is California. Yet even he cannot resist the poetry of it. The vision of men chasing light through wilderness. For the first time, the idea of wealth becomes democratic. One man's luck no longer depends on birth or connection, but on his willingness to move. Historians still argue what mattered more, the gold itself, or the belief in it. The physical metal was finite, a few hundred tons buried in rivers and hills. The belief, however, was endless. It reshaped economies, emptied cities, and filled oceans with ships. It created a new mythology, that fortune belongs to the bold, that the world rewards motion, that waiting is for fools. By the time the first wave of 49ers sets foot in California, the fever has become irreversible. The rumor is no longer a rumor. It is the engine of an entire civilization. The storm has arrived, and it will not calm for years. By the spring of 1849, America is on the move. From the harbors of Boston to the plains of Missouri, the dream of California turns into a national migration. The promise is simple: gold for the taking, fortune for the daring. The reality, however, is less kind. What awaits is not treasure, but distance. Nearly 5,000 kilometers of plains, rivers, deserts, and mountains. For every man who dreams of riches, there are 100 ways to die. Before ever seeing a nugget, there are 3 main routes to the promised land, and each demands a different kind of courage. The Overland Trail begins at Independence, Missouri, the gateway to the West. From there, wagon trains roll out in endless lines, creaking under the weight of supplies and hope. Oxen pull the wagons, families walk beside them. The trail follows the Platte River across Nebraska, climbs through Wyoming, then turns south along the Humboldt River toward California. The journey can take 6 months, sometimes more, depending on weather and luck. Along the way, the scenery changes from prairie grass to sagebrush to barren rock. Graves appear by the roadside, marked by rough wooden crosses. Dysentery and cholera spread faster than gossip. Water is either scarce or poisoned by alkali. Horses die, wheels break, tempers crack. The letters written by those who survive speak in the same quiet tone, not of adventure, but of endurance. The mountains, writes one traveler, seem to mock our every step. The sea route attracts those with money or impatience. Ships sail from New York, Boston, and New Orleans, bound either around Cape Horn at the tip of South America or west of Panama, where passengers cross the isthmus by mule or canoe before catching another ship north. Around the Horn voyages last 6 to 8 months and test every nerve. Storms shred sails, food rots, and scurvy turns gums black. The Panama shortcut is quicker, only about 2 months, but far deadlier. Malaria and yellow fever kill hundreds, sometimes entire crews. One diarist records that the air itself seems to drip with sickness. Despite the hardships, the excitement never fades. Each departure becomes a public event. Crowds gather at docks to cheer the departing ships, their decks piled high with barrels, lumber, and dreams. Newspapers publish lists of passengers as if they are heroes setting out for another world. In a sense, they are. By summer, the western plains are alive with motion. At dawn, wagon trains stretch to the horizon. Oxen snort, and steam rises from the grass. Men walk with rifles slung over their shoulders. Women tend to fires and children chase grasshoppers between the ruts. At night, the plains glow with campfires, like stars fallen to earth. The songs that rise from those camps, rough, off-key, and tired, are the sound of a nation moving west. The travelers call themselves 49ers, borrowing the name from the year that defines them. Some are young men chasing adventure. Others are fathers hoping to secure a future for their families. A few are women, rare but determined, disguised in men's clothes to join the expeditions. They carry everything they own: pickaxes, pans, tents, Bibles, and letters from home, sealed in wax. The heaviest baggage of all is hope. On the trail, cooperation is essential. Groups form into companies with elected leaders and written rules. They share food, guard the wagons, and bury the dead together. When disputes arise, and they often do, the accused are tried by jury and punished on the spot. In this lawless space, democracy is improvised daily. The trail becomes a rehearsal for the society that will later take shape in California. Rough, practical, and deeply suspicious of authority. By autumn, the first wagons begin to descend from the Sierra Nevada into the Sacramento Valley. Their passengers are gaunt, sunburned, and half-mad with exhaustion. Yet when they see the lush valley below, all suffering seems to vanish. They have reached the land of gold. One traveler, unable to believe his fortune, writes home, "I have arrived alive, though my boots and my mind are equally worn through." Meanwhile, the same transformation occurs at sea. The ports of San Francisco and Monterey fill with ships arriving from every ocean. The harbor becomes a forest of masts. Hundreds of vessels abandoned by their crews, who rush inland before even collecting their wages. The ships rot in the water, later repurposed as saloons, warehouses, and floating prisons. The sudden flood of humanity overwhelms California's fragile infrastructure. There are not enough houses, not enough food, not enough law. Prices skyrocket. A single egg costs $1, a shovel, 15. Beer is cheaper than fresh water, and still the ships keep coming. Sails on the horizon, like white wings of obsession. The journey west, once a test of endurance, turns into an emblem of destiny. Politicians call it progress. Preachers call it providence. In reality, it is both, and neither. It is the movement of people drawn by the oldest magnet of all, the promise that the earth hides treasure for those bold enough to dig. Historians still debate what drove these travelers more, faith or fantasy. Perhaps both. What is certain is that the gold rush transforms not only the map of America, but its psychology. From this moment on, success will be measured not by patience, but by risk. The nation learns to idolize the man who gambles everything and wins, or at least dares to try. By the end of 1849, thousands have reached California. Tens of thousands more are still on the road or at sea. They arrive weary but triumphant, convinced they stand at the edge of fortune. Few yet realize that the hardest part of the journey is not behind them. It is waiting in the rivers, the mud, and the endless hunger for more. The world has arrived in California, and the real struggle is about to begin. By 1850, the surface gold, the easy treasure lying in riverbeds and sandbars, has nearly vanished. What remains lies deeper, locked in the veins of mountains. The men who came chasing luck must now learn labor. The gold rush shifts from romance to industry. The sound of trickling water is replaced by the crash of tools, the creak of pulleys, and the roar of rivers forced to change their course. The earliest miners work with panning, the simplest method. They fill a shallow pan with sand and gravel from the river, then swirl it in water. Gold, being heavier, settles at the bottom, where it shines like sunlight trapped in mud. It is slow, back-breaking work, hours of kneeling in cold water for a few glittering flakes. But it costs nothing, and in 1848, EAT was an ogue. 2 years later, it is almost useless. New tools appear, designed to move more earth, faster. The cradle, also called a rocker, allows one man to wash a larger amount of gravel using a rocking motion. The long tom, a wooden trough lined with riffles, processes still more material. Each invention increases efficiency and competition. Men work in groups now, forming partnerships and companies. Camps grow larger, rivers grow dirtier. The land begins to bleed. Then comes the true revolution. Hydraulic mining, invented in 1853 near Nevada City. It uses high-pressure jets of water to blast away entire hillsides, washing tons of gravel into sluices to separate the gold. The method is spectacular and destructive. Forests vanish, rivers filled with silt, valleys drown under debris. What began as a man with a pan becomes a man-made storm powerful enough to reshape landscapes. For the miners, progress means survival. The surface gold is gone, but hope remains buried deeper. Companies with money replace individuals. Steam engines arrive, along with pumps, pipes, and iron machinery. Men once dreaming of instant wealth now sell their labor for wages, working 12-hour days underground. The rush, once democratic, begins to stratify. The frontier of opportunity becomes a hierarchy. Life in the deeper mines is brutal. The air is damp and foul. The light dim. Collapses and explosions are common. Dust fills lungs and eyes. Yet even as accidents multiply, so they'll profits, for the few who can afford the equipment. The miners, mostly immigrants, work for pay that barely buys food. In some camps, Chinese and Latin American workers are banned altogether. The dream of equality that once drew the world here hardens into prejudice and exploitation. Still, ingenuity thrives. Prospectors invent chemical tests to identify gold, while blacksmiths adapt tools from other trades. Rivers are diverted by massive wooden flumes. Hills are carved into terraces. The gold rush becomes a laboratory of mechanical invention, one that will later feed the machinery of railroads and industry. Even failure produces innovation. But progress comes with a price that few recognize at first. The hydraulic cannons, spectacular to watch, unleash a silent catastrophe. Sediment chokes the Sacramento River, flooding farms and towns downstream. Fish vanish, forests erode, and entire valleys turn gray with sludge. Farmers begin to fight back, leading eventually to the first environmental court case in American history, the 1884 decision that bans hydraulic mining in California. By then, the damage is done. The landscape will bear the scars for centuries. While machines transform the earth, the miners themselves change too. T.O.P. Meesom of 1849 gives way to obsession. Diaries from the time describe exhaustion bordering on madness. "We are digging into the bones of the mountains," one man writes. "The gold is hiding deeper each day. Sleep grows rare. Tempus shorter. The camps echo with arguments, drunken songs, and sometimes gunfire. The psychological toll is immense. Many miners suffer what they call the fever, an endless restlessness, the inability to stop digging even after finding enough to live comfortably. "It is a sickness," writes another, "for once you see the gold, nothing else will satisfy." Historians later compare it to gambling addiction, the belief that one more try will change everything. Meanwhile, those who provide food, tools, and entertainment thrive. Merchants, innkeepers, and suppliers build fortunes as miners dig themselves into poverty. Levi Strauss's sturdy trousers, once made from tent canvas, become indispensable. A woman named Mary Ellen Pleasant invests in boarding houses and laundries, quietly amassing a fortune that will make her one of the wealthiest women in San Francisco. The pattern repeats endlessly. The diggers labor, the sellers prosper. By 1853, the gold output of California reaches its peak, nearly $81 million in that year alone, more than any other region in the world. But as quickly as it rises, it begins to decline. The Isley mine gold is exhausted, and the deeper veins demand capital and technology beyond the reach of individuals. Mining companies grow larger, their operations more industrial, their workers more expendable. The gold rush, once an emblem of freedom and individual daring, turns into a business. And with business comes bureaucracy, property rights, taxes, and law. The chaos of the camps begins to settle into order, but the dream that started it all loses its glow. Historians still debate whether this shift marks progress or betrayal. Was the gold rush simply evolving into modern capitalism, or was it dying under its own weight? Perhaps both. The spirit of discovery, that wild, improvised freedom, could not survive in a world of machines and ledgers. Yet the legacy of invention, both mechanical and psychological, would shape the modern age. As the rivers run murky and the hills collapse under the force of water cannons, one truth becomes clear. Gold has never been about the metal itself. It is about the idea that fortune lies just beneath the surface, waiting to be freed. The miners keep digging, the companies keep growing, and the land keeps breaking. The madness, it seems, has become method. By the middle of the 1850s, the dream of instant riches has already hardened into a grim routine. The rivers are quieter now, their beds stripped of glitter, and the once hopeful prospectors have begun to drift away, some homeward, some deeper into the hills. Others simply lost to time. The frenzy that began with a single sparkle in the river has become an economy, an empire of dust and debt. And in that empire, the true winners are not the men with shovels, but the men who never touched the earth at all. Those who truly profit from the gold rush are not miners, but merchants, financiers, and logisticians. The quiet architects of chaos. They understand, even early, on that fortune lies not in gold itself, but in the endless hunger for it. Samuel Brannan, who once galloped through the streets of San Francisco, shouting gold, gold, from the American river, becomes California's first millionaire, not by mining, but by selling. He buys every pan, shovel, and pickaxe in the region. Before announcing the discovery, his customers, the desperate, the hopeful, make him rich within months. By the time most miners find their first flake, Brannan owns half of Sacramento. Others follow his example. Merchants import boots, tobacco, and salted meat from New York, and charge 20 times their cost. Blacksmiths turn iron scraps into tools and fortunes. Gambling halls multiply faster than churches. A banker named William Ralston begins financing mining operations and trading gold dust for credit, an innovation that will help transform California into the financial capital of the Pacific. San Francisco becomes the center of it all, a raw and roaring city of opportunity. Ships unloaded from every corner of the globe fill its harbor with goods, from Peruvian flour to Chinese silk. Warehouses rise where tents once stood, and the first cobbled streets begin to appear. The sound of hammers and wagon wheels merges with piano music from saloons. The city burns to the ground repeatedly in 1849, 1850, and again in 1851. But each time, it rebuilds within weeks. There is simply too much money to be made to stop. Meanwhile, those who dig the earth for gold see less and less of it. The surface deposits vanish, leaving behind only the crumbs of what was once abundance. Men who once found an ounce a day now scrape a few grains. The cost of food and equipment surpasses what most can earn. And still, they keep digging. The logic of the rush, that one more try might change everything, keeps them working long after reason has left. Into this exhaustion step, the entrepreneurs, a tailor named Levi Strauss, who had failed to sell canvas tents, cuts the fabric into trousers for miners who keep tearing their clothes. His waist overalls, reinforced with copper rivets, prove indestructible. They are cheap, practical, and instantly popular. Within a few years, they will be known simply as Levi's, worn from the goldfields of California to the farms of Kansas. Nearby, a candy maker named Domenico Ghirardelli opens a small shop to supply cocoa and sweets to miners craving comfort. His business survives long after the mines close, evolving into one of America's best-known chocolate brands. These quiet victories, born from the miners' hunger and fatigue, outlast every claim along the river. For every prospector ruined, another trader prospers. Those who build infrastructure, ferries, bridges, stagecoaches, find steady income in the movement of men and goods. Companies like Wells, Fargo & Co. begin as express mail services carrying gold dust and letters between camps, but quickly grow into full financial institutions. The same men who once financed pickaxes will later finance railroads, banks, and cities. The gold rush, in this sense, is less about discovery than about transformation, turning chaos into commerce. As the economy expands, new forms of speculation appear. Mining shares are traded like lottery tickets, often in companies that own no mines at all. Newspapers print tall tales of fortunes made overnight, selling dreams alongside stock certificates. By the mid-1850s, San Francisco has its own gold board, a primitive stock exchange where men shout prices over barrels of whiskey. The rush has become financial gold replaced by paper, rumor replaced by confidence. The winners of the gold rush are not just individuals, but systems. The telegraph, introduced in California in 1853, links the West to the East, carrying prices and promises in seconds instead of weeks. The shipping companies that once carried miners now transport goods, mail, and people at industrial scale. The U.S. government, flushed with new wealth from taxes and trade, uses the influx to fund expansion, mapping the West and pushing railroads toward the Pacific. And then there is the unseen class, the workers who make the machinery of profit run. The Chinese miners, barred from rich claims, open laundries, restaurants, and supply stores. The Mexicans and Chileans, pushed from rivers by discrimination, become mule drivers and cooks. African Americans, both free and formerly enslaved, carve out rare opportunities in hospitality and service, though often under constant threat. Their labor, invisible to history's loudest voices, keeps the camps alive. Amid this frenzy, a handful of idealists still dream of utopia. Cooperative mining colonies rise and fall, founded on the belief that shared effort might tame greed. None survive more than a few seasons. The logic of gold devours every ideal in its path. By 1855, when the rush begins to wane, a strange balance emerges. The men who chased fortune return home empty-handed, but the merchants, bankers, and manufacturers remain. California, once an isolated frontier, now pulses. With global trade, the roads built for miners carry farmers, settlers, and families. The banks built two-way gold now finance cities. The chaos of the rush has solidified into structure. Historians often say that the gold rush created the modern American West, not through wealth, but through infrastructure. It turned migration into industry, risk into policy, and greed into growth. The irony, of course, is that the true beneficiaries were never the dreamers who chased gold, but the pragmatists who sold it back to them. One shovel, one loan, 1 ounce at a time. The miners' stories fade, but the legacies of their suppliers endure. The dream of instant wealth has not vanished. It has simply changed hands. From the mud of California's rivers, capitalism learns a new trick how to sell the dream itself. And so, while the diggers pack up and drift away, Terreal Ruse, the one for markets, money, and control, is only beginning. Among the legends of the gold rush, one figure rarely appears. The woman the official histories tell of rough men with pickaxes, roaring saloons, and riverbeds turned to mud. But between those tents and shacks, a quieter world existed. One that held the miners' chaos together. Women, immigrants, and marginalized groups formed the unacknowledged backbone of California's transformation. Their stories seldom glittered like gold, yet they endured longer than most fortunes ever did. When the first rush begins in 1848, California is a man's world. In some camps, there are 50 men for every woman. Most who come west are unmarried, drawn by promises of freedom and fortune. Yet women soon follow some chasing husbands, others opportunity. They arrive as cooks, seamstresses, nurses, teachers, or entrepreneurs. For them, California is not just a land of gold, but of possibility. A woman who in Boston might have been a servant could here open her own boarding house, her own store, her own life. One of the first to see this opportunity is Lucina Stanley Wilson, who travels west with her husband and 2 small children. When they arrive in Nevada City, she opens a small inn, cooking meals for miners too exhausted to feed themselves. She charges $1 a plate and soon earns more than most diggers find in a week. I never dug for gold, she later writes, but I panned out plenty just the same. Her story becomes common women who feed, house, and clothe the miners, build the foundation of California's first communities. Others find profit not in service, but in strategy. Mary Ellen Pleasant, a black woman who arrives in San Francisco in the 1850s, invests her earnings from laundries and boarding houses into real estate and stocks. She becomes one of the richest women in the city, using her wealth to fund abolitionist causes and legal challenges against racial discrimination. Later generations will call her the mother of civil rights in California. Yet for every woman who thrives, hundreds endure hardship. The law offers them no protection, and the camps little mercy. Some are brought against their will, enslaved, trafficked, or trapped in brothels that spring up alongside the saloons. Chinese and Mexican women face double prejudice. As foreigners and as women, they work in laundries, kitchens, and fields, often under brutal conditions. Their names rarely appear in records, erased by both language and bias. The Chinese immigrants, mostly men at first, arrive in large numbers, beginning in 1850. They call California Gamson Gold Mountain. Many have borrowed money for the voyage, hoping to send riches home. Instead, they encounter hostility. White miners accuse them of stealing gold, undercutting wages, or poisoning the rivers. In 1850, the California legislature passes the foreign miners tax, charging $20 a month to non-citizens, a sum that forces most foreigners out of profitable claims. Those who remain face violence and expulsion. Still, the Chinese endure. They turn to other trades, laundries, restaurants, and market gardens. They bring with them skills in engineering and irrigation that reshape the land. By the 1860s, Chinese laborers will be building the Transcontinental Railroad, connecting the same West their hands once mined. Their story is one of persistence without recognition, survival without applause. Other communities meet similar fates. Mexican miners, who had been extracting gold in California long before the Americans arrived, are driven from their claims by vigilante groups. Native Californians suffer the worst. Their lands are seized, their villages destroyed, their populations decimated by violence and disease. Even in San Francisco, where diversity is loud and visible, discrimination shapes daily life. The city's Committee of Vigilance, formed in 1851, claims to enforce order but often serves to punish foreigners and the poor. Lynchings become public spectacle. The same society that celebrates freedom for minors denies it to those who built the infrastructure they depend on. Yet amid injustice, remarkable alliances form. In Sacramento, Chinese and Chilean laborers share camps and tools. In San Francisco, black and white abolitionists cooperate to help fugitive slaves. In remote settlements, Native and Mexican women run trading posts that serve every traveler equally. California, even in its cruelty, becomes a laboratory of coexistence. Fragile, imperfect, but undeniable. There are stories, too, of women who defy every convention. Lotus Long, a Chinese-American entertainer, performs songs in 6 languages at mining camps, earning enough to buy her own theater. Clara Brown, a formerly enslaved woman, travels west as a laundress and later becomes a respected business owner in Colorado. These women, though often left out of official records, leave behind letters and diaries filled with humor, resilience, and an unshakable sense of self. Historians still debate whether the gold rush liberated women or confined them in new ways. It certainly shattered some barriers. Women could own businesses, make contracts, and earn fortunes in ways unimaginable in the East. Yet it also exposed them to dangers unchecked by law or conscience. Freedom and risk, as always, arrived together. The outsiders of the gold rush, women, immigrants, and indigenous people, rarely found gold, but they built something more lasting. They turned chaos into community. They cooked, mended, healed, and taught. They brought stability to a frontier that might otherwise have devoured itself. Without them, California would have remained a camp of ghosts. The men who chased wealth left behind empty pans and broken dreams. They forgotten those who cooked the meals, washed the clothes, and buried the dead left behind cities. By 1851, the goldfields of California no longer resemble the hopeful frontier that began only 3 years earlier. What was once a land of promise has become a cauldron of exhaustion, vice, and illusion. The surface gold is mostly gone. The easy fortunes have dried up, and the hills echo not with joy, but with desperation. The miners call it the fever. It is not a disease of the body, but of the soul. The slow unraveling of reason under the weight of greed. Every morning begins the same way. Men rise before dawn, their faces hollow, their clothes stiff with dust. They wade into the rivers, hands trembling from fatigue, shaking pans of gravel as if trying to wake the earth itself. They no longer sing, no longer talk. They only stare into the swirling water, hoping for a flash of yellow that might justify all they have lost. The camps are different now. Larger, dirtier, angrier. Gambling halls and saloons line the muddy streets. Whiskey flows easier than water. Gunfire is so common that no one looks up when it cracks across the valley. The line between fortune and ruin grows thinner by the day. A single card game can make or destroy a man. A single argument can end in a grave. Crime becomes a business of its own. Bands of robbers, known as road agents, haunt the mountain passes, preying on weary travelers returning from the mines. Vigilante justice spreads an answer. Miners' courts and committees of vigilance hand down sentences swiftly, often by rope. The law is still a rumor in most parts of California. Morality, a luxury few can afford. Prostitution, gambling, and theft dominate the new economy. A good poker dealer earns more than a miner. A successful madam earns more than both. In San Francisco alone, by 1852, there are hundreds of saloons and brothels for a population of barely 30,000. Fire and disease sweep through the city repeatedly, but it always rebuilds. Greed, after all, is a powerful architect. Predators are trying to reclaim the lost souls of the frontier. Their tents fill briefly with repentant men, but by nightfall, the same men are back at the tables. The fever, one minister writes, is a kind of worship, and gold the idol, His words echo the sentiment of many visitors from the East, who see in California not a land of freedom, but a mirror of moral collapse. Among the miners, superstition grows as fast as cynicism. Some believe that luck can be coaxed by rituals, burying a silver coin under a tent post, or refusing to wash on Sundays. Others turn to spiritualism, attending seances in the hopes that the dead might whisper where to dig. Newspapers mock them, but the belief persists. The line between faith and madness has long since blurred. For every successful strike, 100 frauds emerge. Swindlers sell maps to secret goldfields or bottles of worthless dust mixed with brass shavings. Fake mining companies form overnight, selling shares to desperate investors back east. Many of these schemes collapse within months, but by then, their creators have vanished, usually eastward, pockets full of someone else's dream. And yet, amid the moral wreckage, California continues to grow richer. Not in virtue, but in infrastructure. The banks multiply, the telegraph connects, the cities, and the first state government begins to impose taxes and law. It is a paradox historians still marvel at. A society built on greed, sustained by chaos, yet somehow producing order. The psychological toll, however, remains visible. The letters home from miners shift in tone. Early ones speak of adventure and discovery. Later, ones speak of silence. "I have seen men go mad for less than an ounce," writes one miner. "They dig until their hands bleed. 10 dig. More, they forget their own names before they find the gold." The women who live in the camps, cooks, nurses, or wives, witness the decline firsthand. Some keep diaries describing the transformation. One known only as Mrs. T writes, "There is no laughter left. The men no longer talk of home, only of luck. It is as if the gold takes their voices first, then their souls." San Francisco, meanwhile, becomes the empire's capital of vice. Its wharves gleam with imported goods, brandy, silk, weapons, while its alleys fill with the wreckage of human ambition. Fire consumes the city 6 times in as many years, but each disaster is followed by another boom. It is as if ruin itself were profitable, writes a journalist in 1851. Religious leaders, moralists, and reformers try to impose virtue on the new state. Churches rise beside saloons, schools beside gambling halls. But the fever cannot be preached away. California has become something unprecedented, a place where morality bends before opportunity, where every sin can be excused as enterprise. Historians still debate what the gold rush revealed about the American character. Was it a temporary madness, or the birth of a national myth, that wealth justifies anything, and failure belongs to the timid? The answer may lie somewhere in between. The gold rush did not invent greed. It simply stripped away everything that hid it. By the mid-1950s, the fever begins to cool. The easy gold is gone, the river's exhausted, and the miners begin to leave. Some head home, ashamed. Others stay, too changed to return. They build farms, shops, and families, trying to bury the fever under new beginnings. Yet the hunger they carried to that belief in sudden fortune never truly fades. California's hills grow quiet again, but the echo of those years remains. It hums beneath every new boom, every new market, every new get-rich-quick dream. The fever never dies. It only changes form. The gold rush has ended, but the idea that gave it life, that something precious always lies just beneath the surface, will follow humanity forever. By 1855, the gold that once seemed endless is running out. The rivers that once shimmered with promise now flow thick with mud. The shouting in the camps fades to the scrape of shovels and the coughs of men who refuse to quit. The fever has cooled, but the work continues slower, heavier, methodical. What began as chaos begins, at last, to take shape. California is transforming from a frenzy of tents and fires into something that resembles civilization. The same hands that once tore up the earth now build roads, homes, and cities. Wooden planks replace mud in San Francisco's streets. Telegraph wires hum above them. The chaos that once made this land ungovernable now fuels its reinvention. The California state legislature, newly formed, begins to impose laws. Taxes are levied on miners. Official courts replace the rough justice of lynch mobs. A police force is established in San Francisco, followed by the city's first fire department, born out of necessity after so many blazes. In 1850, California enters the Union as the 31st state. It joins not as a distant colony, but as an economic engine already humming with power. With law comes permanence. Property rights replace shutting matches. Contracts replace handshakes. The old dream of luck gives way to the new reality of ownership. The camps that survive become towns. Auburn, Placerville, Nevada City. Churches rise beside gambling halls, and schools open in saloons, once thick with smoke. What was once a moral wasteland becomes a social experiment in reconstruction. But the transition is not smooth. Many miners resist authority, unwilling to trade the freedom of the frontier for the discipline of law. They call taxes theft, courts tyranny, and order a kind of betrayal. California, they say, was built by men who answered to no one. But even rebellion has a price. The same independence that once made the frontier thrive now becomes an obstacle to stability. As the state grows, a new hierarchy takes root. The men who once swung pickaxes for gold now work for wages in corporate mines. The merchants who sold them tools become bankers and industrialists. The railroads follow the same trails once carved by wagons. The dream of equality that brought thousands west dissolves into the familiar structure of capital and labor. And yet, this new order carries its own kind of ambition. The chaos of the gold rush had proved one thing: California's fertile ground not only for gold but for ideas. In San Francisco, new ventures appear every week. Trading companies, shipping firms, insurance offices, and newspapers. In Sacramento, engineers sketch canals and water systems. In the Sierra Nevada, minor stone surveyors begin mapping routes for a transcontinental railroad. The same energy that once fueled greed now powers invention. Henry Wells and William Fargo, having made fortunes transporting gold, create a permanent financial network. Their company, Wells Fargo & Co., evolves from stagecoaches into banks, the circulatory system of the New West. The gold itself, once carried in sacks and guarded by pistols, now moves on paper. Promissory notes, checks, and credit slips. California learns that money travels faster when it isn't heavy. San Francisco becomes the West's first true metropolis, still volatile, still wild, but undeniably modern. Wooden sidewalks give way to cobblestone. The wharf expands into a forest of cranes. Ships from Asia, South America and Europe, dock daily. Silk, tea, and porcelain from China arrive alongside Chilean wheat and Peruvian sugar. The gold that lured the world here is now traded for everything the world can offer in return. And with trade comes culture. Theaters, galleries, and concert halls appear. Newspapers debate politics and philosophy. Poets and writers begin to describe the West not as a frontier, but as a nation within a nation. The chaos of the rush becomes the mythology of the Republic, a story Americans tell themselves about daring, risk, and reward. Yet beneath this progress lies an unspoken cost. The land bears deep scars. Entire forests have been cut, rivers diverted, mountains gutted. The indigenous peoples, once the stewards of these valleys, have been nearly erased. Some find work in the new farms and factories. Others retreat to the margins, forgotten by the state they unwillingly helped to build. The gold that brought order also brought ruin. Historians often describe this moment as America's pivot from frontier to industry. The gold rush, they argue, was less about metal than momentum. It taught a generation how to organize chaos into capital. The railroads, the telegraph, and later the oil boom all follow the same pattern. Discovery, frenzy, collapse, consolidation, profit. California is the prototype of modern capitalism. Ruthless, inventive, and By the late 1850s, the gold fields are quieter. The pickaxes give way to ledgers, the miners to clerks. San Francisco bankers finance railroads instead of claims. The dream has shifted again, from finding wealth to managing it. But even as the dust settles, the fever's shadow remains. Men still arrive from distant shores, lured by the idea that California is where fortunes are born overnight. Some strike it rich, in shipping, in land, in trade, but most find the same truth that haunted the first miners. The gold is never where you expect it to be. California, once a wilderness, is now a mirror of ambition. The rush for gold is ending, but the rush for power, ownership, and innovation has just begun. The West has learned how to turn frenzy into empire. The shouts of the 49ers have faded into memory, replaced by the steady hum of order, railroads clattering, telegraphs clicking, presses rolling. The fever has become a system, and in that transformation lies the birth of the modern world. The gold rush does not end in California. It spreads, like fire, following the wind, to every corner of the earth. Once the world has seen that a handful of men with shovels can transform an empty wilderness into an empire, the pattern repeats itself again and again, across oceans and continents. The fever, once local, becomes global. By the mid-1850s, news of California's gold has reached every port city on Earth. Newspapers in London and Paris call it the great miracle of the West. But even as the Californian mines begin to dwindle, new rumors rise. In 1851, gold is discovered in New South Wales, Australia. Within weeks, thousands of people abandoned farms, ships, and offices to chase fortune down under. The Australian government, terrified that the colony's convict labor system will collapse, first tries to suppress the news and fails. Witin, Ayariare, Ballarat, and Bendigo are booming. The same pattern plays out almost identically. Discovery, rumor, migration, chaos, control. The Australian gold rush brings hundreds of thousands of newcomers, mostly British and Chinese. Towns sprout overnight, and in them the same ingredients appear: tents, saloons, greed, and grit. The fortune seekers dig, fight, and dream in the same rhythm that once filled the valleys of California. The rush reshapes Australia's identity, transforming it from a penal colony into a prosperous, self-governing society. Next comes British Columbia in 1858. When gold is found along the Fraser River, tens of thousands pour in from the United States, carrying memories of California in shovels still stained with its dust. Victoria, a sleepy port town on Vancouver Island, becomes a global crossroads. Then, in the 1860s, the fever jumps again to New Zealand, where miners carve settlements like Dunedin and Queenstown from the cold southern hills. Africa follows. In the 1880s, gold is found near the Witwatersrand in the Transvaal, igniting the South African gold rush. Johannesburg, a patch of dry veldt, transforms into a metropolis within a decade. The mines there are deep, dangerous, and industrial from the start, worked not by adventurers, but by laborers, many of them coerced under colonial rule. The gold extracted from those mines will finance empires, wars, and railroads far beyond Africa's borders. And then, at the very edge of the 19th century, the fever burns one last time in the Klondike. In 1896, in the frozen north of Canada's Yukon Territory, prospectors find gold along Bonanza Creek. The discovery comes at the perfect moment. The world, weary of industrial monotony, longs again for adventure. Within months, 30,000 people are marching through snowstorms, dragging sleds across the mountain passes, chasing a fantasy of freedom and fortune that has already vanished. The Klondike Rush becomes the last great pilgrimage of its kind. Its images: men climbing the icy Chilcot Pass, endless lines of boaties silhouetted against the white sky, define the mythology of the frontier. Jack London will later immortalize it in stories like The Call of the Wild and White Fang, tales that blend hardship with transcendence. The fever, at last, becomes legend. Each of these rushes follows the same human script. The first phase is always hope. Gold glimmering in a pan, a rumor whispered, a headline printed. The second is chaos. Ships overloaded, prices soaring, tempers flaring. The third is collapse. Greed erasing harmony, the earth stripped bare, and finally, consolidation. Banks, railroads, and governments stepping in to tame what began as wild anarchy. Wherever gold is found, civilization follows, and so does its shadow. Indigenous peoples are displaced, rivers are poisoned, forests are cut down. The earth itself becomes a casualty of ambition. In Australia, miners clashed violently with colonial police in the Eureka Rebellion, a protest for fair rights and taxation. In South Africa, the mines breed inequality that will later harden into apartheid. In the Klondike, thousands die of frostbite and starvation before reaching the diggings. The fever never travels alone. It carries both progress and pain. Yet the global legacy of the gold rushes is not purely material. They reshape how humanity understands wealth and time. Before the 19th century, prosperity was seen as slow, generational, earned through work or inheritance. After California, a new belief takes hold, that fortune can arrive suddenly, even undeservedly. The myth of instant wealth becomes as valuable as gold itself, an idea that will outlive every mine. In economic history, the gold rushes accelerate globalization. Trade routes link distant continents. Capital moves faster than ever before. The gold extracted from California, Australia, and South Africa stabilizes national currencies, fuels the expansion of banks, and funds the spread of the British Empire. Telegraph lines, ports, and railroads, built for the rush, endure long after the miners leave. Even failure leaves behind infrastructure. By the dawn of the 20th century, nearly every major economy has been touched by the fever in some form. The pattern repeats with new materials. Silver in Nevada, copper in Chile, diamonds in Kimberley, oil in Pennsylvania. Humanity learns to chase not just gold, but anything that glitters, anything that promises a shortcut through the long grind of life. Historians still argue whether the gold rushes made the world richer or merely rearranged its hunger. Economically, they connected continents. Socially, they exposed every fault line, class, race, and greed. Spiritually, they left behind an unquenchable thirst. The fever that began on the American River in 1848 had no borders. It traveled with ships and stories, with the same reckless hope that perhaps this time the gold will finally be enough. But it never is, because what spreads around the world is not gold, but the dream of it, a dream far more enduring and far more dangerous. When the last major Californian mines fall silent in the 1860s, most assume the story is over. The rivers are drained, the hills scarred, the miners long gone. But history, like gold, has a way of lingering just beneath the surface. The gold rush may have ended, but its spirit, that wild belief in instant fortune, refuses to die. It simply finds new forms, new frontiers, new excuses. The fever mutates. The pickaxe becomes a stock certificate. The shovel becomes a railroad bond. The pan becomes a prospectus, promising limitless returns. The same hunger that once sent men across oceans now fuels boardrooms, trading floors, and oil fields. The idea that fortune can be seized, not earned. That luck can replace patience, becomes a permanent part of modern civilization. The shift happens quickly. By the 1860s, San Francisco is no longer a frontier town but a financial capital. Banks line Montgomery Street. Telegrams from New York arrive in minutes. Merchants who once sold shovels now invest in railroads. Levi Strauss turns from outfitter to manufacturer, his name stitched onto trousers worn around the world. Samuel Brannan, the loudest voice of the rush. He is penniless, but his methods live on in every advertiser who sells a dream louder than its truth. The language of mining becomes the language of capitalism. Investors speak of striking it rich, veins of opportunity, and boom and bust. Every new invention, the telegraph, the steamship. Later, the stock ticker promises another gold field, another chance to get ahead before the rest of the world catches up. The psychology of the gold rush, impatience disguised as optimism, becomes the heartbeat of the modern age, and with it, the old rhythm returns. Boom, rumor, rush, collapse, recovery. The cycle that began on the American River repeats endlessly. It happens again in the silver mines of Nevada, in the oil fields of Pennsylvania, in the stock bubbles of London and New York. Each new discovery promises to end struggle forever. Each ends by reminding humanity that greed has no finish line. The gold rush also transforms how people imagine success. Before it, wealth had been tied to lineage, education, and slow accumulation. After it, anyone, or so it seemed, could become rich overnight. That myth shapes the next century. The self-made man, the frontier hero, the entrepreneur, whether or not they ever held a pen, all share the miner's faith that somewhere, buried in the earth or in the market, lies a hidden treasure waiting to be claimed. The fever's influence seeps into culture. Writers romanticize the frontier as a place of freedom and moral testing. Painters fill canvases with heroic miners framed in sunset light. Children grow up reading about brave men who conquered nature and returned home with their pockets full. Few mention the broken towns or poisoned rivers left behind. The gold rush becomes an allegory, not of greed, but of progress. And yet, beneath the celebration, unease remains. Philosophers like Henry George, who grows up in California, began to question the morality of wealth without labor. In his 1879 book, Progress and Poverty, he asks why prosperity always seems to enrich the few while impoverishing the many. His arguments that unearned wealth corrupts society inspire reformers for generations. But his warnings, like those of Thoreau before him, are drowned out by the noise of ambition. The myth of instant fortune moves beyond gold entirely. In the early 20th century, oil becomes the new obsession. Black gold. Then come automobiles, aviation, electronics, and finally, digital technology. Each era promises a revolution that will make everyone rich. And ARCH time, a small handful succeed, while the rest watch the cycle repeat. California itself becomes the symbol of this eternal optimism. The same hills once dug for gold will later host Hollywood studios and Silicon Valley startups. Different tools, same faith. The continuity is uncanny. The miners panned rivers. The filmmakers mine imagination. The coders mine data. The currency changes, but the hunger remains identical. A desire to turn dreams into wealth before someone else does. The frontier never ends. It simply goes virtual. Historians still debate whether the gold rush improved humanity or exposed its worst instincts. It built cities, connected continents, and accelerated innovation. But it also left behind landscapes stripped bare and societies built on inequality. It gave the world both progress and its price. By the late 19th century, California's rivers run quiet again, but the idea born beside them flows everywhere. Every boom that follows from Wall Street to Silicon Valley carries a trace of that first glittering flake in the American river. The gold rush never truly ended because it was never just about gold. It was about time, about the human refusal to wait. It taught millions that patience is weakness. That fortune is not earned but captured. That risk is a virtue and failure merely a pause. The fever, in its modern form, no longer needs rivers or hills. It lives in markets, machines, and mines. The pickaxe has become a metaphor. The gold is invisible, the madness eternal. By the end of the 19th century, the hills of California are quiet again. The rivers run brown with silt and memory. The towns that once rang with the clang of picks and the shouts of men are fading. Some swallowed by forest, others left as skeletons of wood and rust. The gold rush, that furious experiment in human desire, has burned itself out, yet its traces are everywhere, woven into the bones of the modern world. The landscape bears the scars most visibly. Entire mountains are cut in half, their guts exposed where hydraulic cannons once roared. Valleys are filled with sediment, rivers rerouted or destroyed. Forests that once shaded the Sierra Nevada foothills are gone, replaced by ghost towns and dust. Even now, more than a century later, gold tailings lie buried beneath farms and suburbs, quiet poison under green lawns. But the deeper scars are invisible. The indigenous nations of California, once numbering in the hundreds of thousands, have been nearly erased. Those who survived the diseases and massacres of the early rush years were pushed onto reservations or absorbed into the new economy as laborers. Their languages vanish from the valleys that still bear their names. To them, The gold rush is not a legend of progress, but a wound that never healed. For the descendants of the miners, the story is more complicated. Some families grew rich, bought land, built dynasties. Others fell into poverty as quickly as they had risen. The gold itself, so bright in memory, proved fleeting. Most of it ended up in the vaults of banks and governments, melted into coins and reserves that would back the world's currencies for decades. California's gold became the foundation of modern finance, invisible yet omnipresent, circulating through the veins of global trade. The fever that once consumed men by the river evolved into something more refined, ambition disguised as opportunity. By the 20th century, California no longer promised metal, but dreams. It sold sunlight, freedom, and reinvention. The same energy that built the mining camps, built Hollywood, the aerospace industry, and Silicon Valley. Every generation rediscovers the same illusion, that paradise and profit share the same soil. In Sensei, the gold rush never ended. It simply changed its vocabulary. The pickaxe became the camera, the circuit board, the startup. The belief remained the same, that a single brilliant idea, like a gold flake in the river, could change everything. That somewhere, hidden in the dust of daily life, lies the shortcut to eternity. Yet, for all its waste and violence, the gold rush also created the California we know, a place defined by reinvention, risk, and restless hope. It forged a culture of movement, where failure is temporary and ambition sacred. The dreamers who came here left more than ghost towns. They left a blueprint for a world forever, chasing its next discovery. The paradox endures. The gold rush brought civilization to the frontier roads, cities, laws, but also revealed civilization's oldest weakness, the belief that happiness can be mined. Historians describe it as America's first modern myth, a story so powerful it rewrote how humanity measures success. After California, effort and virtue mattered less than timing and luck. The idea that fortune could be instant became a permanent feature of the human mind. Standing today on the banks of the American River, the site of Marshall's discovery feels almost peaceful. Pine needles drift on the surface. The water glimmers softly. The stones are the same ones he turned in his hand that morning in 1848. But the world that moment created has changed beyond recognition. Here, in this quiet, it is hard to imagine that this was once the center of the world, that from this calm river sprang cities, nations, and ideas that still shape our age. The fever is gone, but the echo remains. A whisper that says, just one more try, one more dream, one more turn of the pan. Historians still wonder whether the gold rush was a triumph or a warning. Perhaps it was both. Proof of what human beings can build when driven by hope, and of what they are willing to destroy in the process. Either way, the story endures, because the rush was never really about gold. It was about belief, about the shimmer on the surface of things that convinces us something better is waiting just beneath. And even now, long after the last nugget has been found, the world still listens for that shimmer. The California gold rush began with one man, one river, and one fragment of metal no larger than a fingernail. Yet its reverberation has never stopped. It reshaped not only a land, but the human imagination. The idea that wealth could be seized in an instant, that the universe might bend for a single stroke of luck, became an enduring article of faith in the modern age. The story of the gold rush is not simply about greed. It is about motion, millions of lives uprooted, continents connected, landscapes remade. It is about faith in the improbable, and the cost of that faith. It transformed California from an overlooked province into a symbol of modern destiny. It linked oceans with trade, made bankers of merchants, and dreamers of ordinary men. The price, however, was steep. Forests fell, rivers died, entire cultures vanished beneath the crush of ambition. The indigenous peoples of California lost not only their land, but their voices in the story that followed. The miners who found gold often found ruin just as quickly. And yet, from this wreckage, new systems of law, commerce, and communication emerged. Civilization grew from chaos, but it was civilization learned through damage. The legacy of the gold rush is everywhere we look, in every economic boom and collapse, in every speculative frenzy, in every new frontier, digital financial, or technological, we hear the same echo. This time will be different, but it never truly is. The tools change, the hunger remains. Silicon Valley, Wall Street, crypto, space mining. Each is a descendant of that first glittering discovery on the American river. And yet, there is something deeply human in that hunger. The belief in transformation, in redemption, in the possibility that life can change overnight. It is both our curse and our engine. The gold rush revealed that hope is not rational, but it is unstoppable. If you stand today by the water where James Marshall once bent down, the river looks ordinary. The world it created, however, still flows around you in every ambition, every market, every restless dream. The fever that began in 1848 has simply gone quiet, buried under glass and steel, pulsing in the circuitry of our modern world. The gold rush ended more than a century and a half ago, but its idea, the dream of instant wealth, the belief that the next discovery will finally be the one, remains alive in us all. Because the real gold was never in the ground, it was in the mind.